This is the weekly review for the week of September 19th to September 23rd, as well as this week's Sunday preparation. So, I didn't really do much this week with EU. I came into the week with a bearish bias. So, on Monday, I was expecting bullish price action to form, or for price to trade up to form the high of the week. And we did end up getting that here. We had a small short-term setup um, that I noted, but I did not take it, where we had a SMT with London low and then this displacement up, and then we returned back into this fair value gap and traded higher. Also the breaker here. Um, Really, I just saw price consolidating inside this fair value gap. I was thinking about setting a buy, but I just ended up watching price action this day, honestly. I didn't take any action. I just wanted to see what would end up happening, and this trade ended up playing out. So we ended up moving a lot, actually, after London close at 12, and that's when Asian session took previous week's high, and this was also a daily high. I believe that was previous week's high. No, it was not previous week's high. It was just a daily high. And we had a SMT with GU inside a daily fair value gap. So this ended up pricing in the high of the week. And coming into Tuesday, I missed a lot of this narrative live, but the short that ended up presenting itself in New York session was pretty logical if I had seen all of these confluences um, when I was looking at the charts. But yeah, we had the raid and then this displacement down. Um, we broke market structure. This wasn't that aggressive down. So the short that occurred in London, I wouldn't have taken. I mean, even though I don't trade London, but just based on the actual setup, because this really wasn't enough displacement for me. But we did end up coming back into the fair value gap in premium. But then we had this big move down here, right? And this is what should have caught all of our eyes and say, okay, this is bearish, given the context of the daily raid with SMT in the fair value gap, and then this low time frame setup coming up to the M15 fair value gap in premium, and then boom, down. And then here was the entry in New York session, where in the interim session is when we came back up into it the first time, but then right at the beginning of New York, we just wicked right up into the bottom of this bearish fair value gap, and then traded lower pretty much instantly to take out previous day's low here. So this entry here would have definitely been logical for me if I had seen the whole narrative when I was looking at the charts live. And then I also noted that we had a power 3 long setup here, where EU took previous day's low. GU did not take previous day's low. And we had this initial displacement up. Now, when I was looking at this live, I was wondering if this here is a M15 fair value gap right here. And I was wondering if this was going to be institutional order flow entry drill to go short, because the low of the day ended up forming at 8:45. So this right here isn't indicative of a power 3 setup yet, because usually we want to see the low of the day form between 10 and 11 a.m., which is the end of New York session and the beginning of London close session. So I was watching this and I said, is this going to be a short here? But I wasn't comfortable taking a short because we were below previous day's low, so we just took that liquidity. But then we also had a SMT. And upon reviewing this, even if I had taken a short here, we would have initially traded down, right? But then we had this candle right here, this M5 candle, closing at 945. And then the candle closing at 950 here created this fair value gap. So even if you were short here, once you saw this fair value gap being created, within the context that price already took previous day's low with SMT, and we also had the short-term SMT here, this I believe would have been the signal to bail out of your shorts, and you would have been able to get out here at break even. And then price ended up having even more clear displacement higher, breaking market structure, and then we came back down into discount very slightly, came back down into discount and traded up to this M15 fair value gap. So this would have been a clear setup for me. I was away from the charts at this time, but at least I noted that this would have been a logical setup here. So moving on to Wednesday. Wednesday was FOMC, where they raised the interest rates by 75 basis points. I did not end up doing absolutely anything. I didn't want to trade. ICT said don't trade Wednesday, so I just didn't. We took previous day's low with huge displacement down, but there really was no low time frame setup up in here. We did RTO the fair value gap and trade lower, but I couldn't identify anything to take advantage of in here. And then just with FOMC, we ended up taking the low of the month and rallied back up to take buy side from the initial shorters here, and then went down. I don't think it's necessarily too important because we shouldn't be trading these conditions according to ICT. So moving on to Wednesday. Wednesday we had this initial run up in London here, and the bias for me was still bearish, and we came up into a premium of previous day's range, but we also formed these equal highs up here. So I was a little bit concerned about that, and then we started just consolidating, and we did end up having a slight raid of the buy side liquidity equal highs here, but this little raid here at 850, when I was watching this live, I really just wasn't convinced of this. So even though we had some sort of, at least a brief setup here with a displacement down, breaking market structure, and it returned to the breaker here, there was no fair value gap that it returned to. But again, this was just all in consolidation, so I didn't feel comfortable taking that. And then we also had this SMT with London high on GU. I think the more logical trade would have come here in this institutional order flow entry drill at the M15 fair value gap. And we did end up returning to that nicely and trading back down, not taking, or taking London low, and we formed a SMT there around 11 a.m. So now this was the more clear power 3 setup, because the low of the day ended up forming here at 11 a.m. as we would expect with an SMT, and then we had the displacement up here creating a shift in market structure, came back down to the fair value gap in discount, very briefly coming back into discount, and then rallying higher into this low resistance liquidity run. Now, coming into Friday, we took previous day's low again and had a very brief Judas swing up. We didn't spend much time above the 12 a.m. opening price and had a very large displacement down here. Now, because it was Friday and the low of the week was being formed on Friday, I honestly was just looking for a bullish setup, anticipating price to retrace into the weekly range. But we actually didn't get any sort of power 3 setup here. Price remained bearish the whole day. And in fact, we were presented with a short setup here where price took the interim session high between 5 and 7 a.m. here with a SMT, displacement down, and then a return to the fair value gap that was formed here. But yeah, I didn't take this because I was just focused on buys, but that never presented itself. I don't know, I feel like I sometimes marry a bias too much, but I just wasn't comfortable taking shorts on a Friday where the low of the week was being formed. But yeah, this was a setup for Friday. So looking at next week, the bias is definitely going to still be bearish. DXY looks like it wants to take, or at least at the minimum, fill in this monthly imbalance here. And I think that these relative equal highs up here from, I believe they're 2001, yeah, are also on the menu. So in terms of what I'm anticipating this week's candle, or how this week's candle should play out, I think that we have this breaker here, daily breaker. So we took the liquidity above these daily highs up into a daily fair value gap here, and this is also a weekly fair value gap. Displacement down, shift in market structure here, break in market structure here. So what I'm anticipating is that we're going to form a swing low potentially on the daily and then trade back up here and form basically a range on the daily chart. And I'll look for shorts in premium of that range if we form one. So we're going to need to wait 2 more days to see if a potential swing low here forms. But yeah, that's the only thing that I'm really seeing on the daily chart for EU. And we have these 2 sets of relative equal highs that also line up with premium of the potential dealing range that we could form. But honestly, I'm not too sure because we're pretty much, I don't know, the way I see it, we're pretty much in no man's land for EU. When we're trading outside of a range, I don't really feel comfortable. So that's why I'm hoping a range forms here on the daily, and that would just be a lot clearer for me that we would retrace into premium and then roll over. But we'll obviously have to see how price ends up opening up this week. But yeah, those are just my thoughts. We'll see how this ends up playing out.